Hey everybody, I wanted to show you guys an update to this system because I've recently kind of changed how I go about building fixtures in Unreal, and I would much rather use the back end of their system than I would create unnecessary custom assets unless I want that level of detail. And so if you look at some of my custom fixtures, you can tell I obviously like to create my own custom meshes or textures as opposed to using Unreal Engine plugins default matrix fixture mesh. And so someday I do want to come along and update some of these meshes. This guy's having a party, but that's okay. And so I want to show you how to use Unreal Engine 5's plugin backend system, but still be able to modify everything you need. Whether or not I'm rendering the lens, or the haze amount, or the spotlight if that renders, or changing the body. So I do want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters for helping me kind of steer me in the right direction of all these methods. Because I was kind of going about on my own, and it wasn't until Mr. Eterno actually said that he wants this to all fit into the MVR workflow. And that's when it kind of clicked for me to be using Unreal Engine 5's backend where possible, and then adding additional elements or modifying outside elements from that point on. And so if you want to modify new elements, just start in the event graph. We start off with just these three nodes here. And what I've learned is, in this case, to either modify your value per attribute map by finding new attributes and then mixing and matching those to make a different RGB value. Or if you want to update custom stuff, you still leave these nodes in and you add, coming out of this pin, you add more customizability. So let's say you add a custom mesh in and you need to change one of the attributes on it, you would add in a static mesh, and that could be, say, your body. And then from there you would say set vector parameter value on materials, or even set scalar parameter value on materials, and then wire those after you update all of the other attributes. So it can update whatever attributes it wants. These will then either override it or just add to it. So that's kind of my workflow going forward. I've already showed this method on a previous video, which I'll leave the link for, or a little button for right here. But this is how I would go about modifying some of those attributes on custom fixtures that have been built off of the Unreal Engine 5 plugin, so that you can modify, say, the haze amount, or just eliminate it completely. The spotlight is pretty easy. You can still select each of these fixtures and say disable lights, and when you refresh your DMX, you'll see that it's no longer rendering the spotlight, or it's probably not rendering the point light either. If you want to disable the rendering of the lens or the emissive color, what that is in your blueprint is just the static mesh lens. And believe it or not, you can just delete that and compile it, and suddenly you're not rendering a lens anymore. It's just the beam and the light. If you don't want that, you can go ahead and undo it, and you'll still have a lens when you get back. To modify the body, you would find the static mesh head and then change that to whatever static mesh you want. And then if you have to change the size of your lens to fit that, you would do that here. So with the head, let's change this to say just a cube. And then in viewport, we can adjust our scale just so that the lens shows. And then when you go out of that, everything looks right. Now, if you wanted to lower the amount of the beam that you see or lower the haze amount, because maybe that's a bit heavy, that's a little bit trickier, but very possible. Now, just a warning, you are modifying engine content if you follow this next step. But if you do it right, it's not going to be an issue. It might add a little bit more computing time. So what we're going to do is go to our event graph of this RGB LAW fixture that we made. And we're going to find under here the color component. We're going to right click that and say edit color component. And then we are in our engine content at this time. If you don't want to use the engine content, you can go back to the blueprint and say find class in content browser. And then copy this over to your copied engine content so that just you know where it is. And then you can apply this. You can I would drop it in first so as not to render it with nothing. And then you can delete your old one and then just rename this color component. And then to double check that this is your copied one, not your engine content, you can say find class. And yes, we are in our copied engine content. So either way works. But what we're going to do is edit this content. And here is where we apply our color to our spotlight. Here's where we apply it to the point light that I've kind of never seen before. And here's where we apply it to our lens and our beam. So if you want to do just the beam, I would break this connection and then just duplicate this with Control C and Control V. I did that wrong. So now we are updating only our beam. What we're going to do is take this color and multiply it. And then we're going to change this here to a float. And then wire this in. Save that, and if you want to make this a variable and make it a little more useful, like you can punch 0.5 or 0.3 in here. And then when we go back to our blueprint, you'll see that our haze amount has decreased by quite a bit. Now, if you want to make this a variable and make it on a per instance fixture, you would just right click this and say promote to variable. And then call this haze amount. And this is still in your color component blueprint. Or color component, well, yeah, I said that right. And then in your static head, in the construction script, not for every DMX update, you drag in your color component and then drag off of that and say set haze amount. And that's where you get access to this variable. Now you can make this on a per instance fixture if you right click this and then promote this to a variable as well. And then expose it by clicking on the eyeball. Now we can say haze amount with let's give it a default of 1. And now when we get out of this, we refresh, it's at 1. But we could take any one of these and lower our haze amount. And when we refresh, it will take effect. So let's give it 10% haze amount. What happens if we give it 2? Let's find out. Or a value higher than 10. Ah, yeah, it definitely takes effect there. So that's how you would modify the light, the lens, the haze beam mesh, or the body of the fixture. Then just to elaborate on that a little bit, if you want to not render your beam at all, like let's say you want to get rid of it, you can just go to static mesh beam and change it from, interesting, it's not visible there. Well, you can set this to hidden in game. And then it will still be visible in editor. That's the problem. So I'm going between game view and editor view here, but it's still visible. And so what you want to do if you don't want to render that beam at all is go into your color component, and just like we made a new variable here, we're going to make another Boolean variable. And so this is for the beam. We're going to drag out here and say if branch, and then this is going to be promoted to a variable, and it's going to be called use beam. And this one doesn't need to be public because we're going to pass it to the blueprint that's holding that component. So what we may need to do here as well, I don't think so. I was going to say we might need to go to from false and set this to render as black. But I don't think we need to do that because every time I move this around anyway and refresh the construction script, the beam disappears until I flash the grandmaster or change the DMX values. And so in our construction script, then on our fixture or whatever blueprint is using our color component, we're going to drag out from our color component again and say set use beam, and then promote this to a variable that we can access in our fixture and expose it. And then I would set this default, where is it? I would set this default to be true so that by default we do use our beam. And then be sure to connect these event pins. Now we can go into our world view and we can still change our haze amount. Let's go back to our beam real quick and turn hidden in game to false. So now if we do want to completely disable the rendering of our beam, we just hit this check and now we don't have a beam. And we're not dealing with the processing of in our color component. We're not actually setting this vector parameter value. We're just saving that. Thank you, everybody. If you like the content you see here, subscribe because I like it too. And I'm going to be posting a lot more content about Unreal Engine DMX system. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see y'all someday. Take care.